Throughout human history, one thing has been a constant: crime. There are many types of crimes committed and many types of investigators who look into them. Criminals get very creative to stay ahead of the law. Find out crime doesn't pay. Join Jess Nasty as he dissects various crimes, mysteries, and disappearances.
Crime Maze.
Well, hello everyone, my amazing YouTube family everywhere. Thank you so much for joining me today. I go by ESTEY'S Crime Maze on YouTube. That's right. We're talking the Idaho4 case, my friends. And boy, do you look beautiful, by the way. So I've only put out a few videos. This is a new channel, everyone. Again, it's called ESTEY'S Crime Maze. And this Idaho4 case, as hopefully you're going to find, everyone, it is absolutely fascinating. And unfortunately, it is tragic. So we're going to talk about the motive behind the supposed killer, right? This unaliver. YouTube likes to use that term, unaliver. But anyway, no, they've arrested, we know, Brian Kohberger, right? And we're going to talk about this in a moment, everyone. But before I go on, just a quick reminder, if I may, everyone. If you enjoy my videos, of course, I hope you'll subscribe. It helps with the algorithms, as well as hitting that like button, smash it, right? Helps with the algorithms, getting the videos out to you, and hit the bell icon. That also helps get the video out, apparently, ultimately to you guys and gals, okay? And feel free to leave me a comment, and I read them, and I appreciate the engagement. So, without further ado, everyone, let's get into the motive, because, it's so amazing. Of course, I'm what many YouTubers call a pro-burger, right? There's no way. I totally agree with other YouTubers like Jay Embry, Lana for Truth and Transparency, and many, many other YouTubers. They know that Brian Kohberger did not do the crime when you do the research. And it all goes back to the motive, or the lack of, right, everyone? There is no motive. Brian Kohberger has no motive to do a quadruple homicide, let alone most of us that use critical thinking. Again, reason, logic, common sense. The guy most likely was not physically capable of unaliving, stabbing to death, no less, 4 healthy young university students. Are you kidding me? Did you guys see the selfie, for example? Remember, he looked emaciated, skinny. Unfortunately, Brian, we know, has had heroin problems. Like a lot of people in this small town of Moscow, Idaho, there's a lot of drugs. And by the way, everyone, just real quick, all these guilters, people that are convinced that Brian Kohberger did the crime, they don't even bother to look at alternative suspects, the drug angle, right? They don't connect the dots, seemingly. It's unbelievable. Daniel, my buddy from the Drunk Turkey Show, I was on his channel before, everyone, and I highly recommend it. Check his channel out. He's got a great channel. He's a really good communicator. But Daniel he's another example, I believe, everyone, he's just got the blinders on, seemingly. The guy doesn't look at the evidence that this was a gang-sanctioned hit. And I don't think Daniel even talks about it very often, that there is no motive. Instead, what Daniel did, he interviewed Steve G, of course. And I don't disagree that Daniel would do the interview, but Steve G went on, I believe, about, Brian was fixated on, on his professor's teacher, Kathleen Rams. What's her name? I don't want to get her name wrong. Kathleen Ramslin, right? So Steve G, my friends, he's made ridiculous, outrageous comments, in my opinion. My heart goes out to him in some ways that he lost his daughter, but we got to be careful, everyone. I believe Steve G is just an FBI shill at this point. And I think deep down inside, he knows that Brian is not capable of doing this quadruple homicide. And again, everybody, I want to discuss on this video, there is no motive. And we know this because even the prosecution admitted it, my friends. But Steve G won't tell you this, right? The prosecution, I'm just going to put these glasses on for a moment, everyone. The prosecution had to admit, in so many words, that we know there is no identifiable connection of Brian Kohberger to the victims. As I've said in my last videos, he has no identifiable connections to the family. He has no identifiable connection to the residents. and really even the area, right, everyone? He's from out of town, which is all part of the convenient narrative for law enforcement. Brian Kohberger didn't even go to the University of Moscow, Idaho, where the university students that had their lives snuffed out way too early, he didn't even go to their school, everyone. So why on earth would this guy, with cars out front, skinny Brian Kohberger, who, even though he's about 5'11", he's not a short little pipsqueak, but he is skinny. Why would he even attempt to do this quadruple homicide? It makes no sense. But guys like Daniel from the Drunk Turkey Show, Daniel's even hinted that, Brian maybe did this for fame. Come on. That's baloney. He didn't do it for fame. Brian Kohberger has nothing to do with this crime, I believe, everyone. He certainly is not, the lone assailant. We know there's at least two assailants, most likely, because now the evidence is coming out, or will be coming out soon, that apparently there were two weapons. That means two assailants, most likely. Right, everyone? So, again, everyone, Brian Kohberger has no identifiable connection. And I just want to go over some of the interviews that Daniel did, because he interviewed Steven Gonzalez, right? He also interviewed a woman that I guess is a criminology major or teaches criminology. And, she believes that Brian Kohberger did the quadruple homicide, apparently. She went on to say, he lacks identity. I'm not sure how she knows that. And she thinks that Brian did the crime, apparently, because she said so many words that, he was fixated on his professor. Again, Kathleen Ramslin. Let me just, I want to make sure I got her name right, everyone, here. Just a sec here. Where is it? Yes, Catherine, I believe it's Catherine Ramslin. Anyway, she's a very notoriously famous forensic psychologist, right, everyone? Catherine Ramslin or Ramsfield. And she's written, apparently I wrote here, she's written 73 books. And she's represented many high-profile serial killers in her books. One of them is called Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer, Why They Kill. And by the way, everyone, she had a course called Violent Crimes that apparently Brian Kohberger took. But again, everyone, Brian Kohberger, reason, logic, common sense, it makes no sense. He's not going to do a quadruple homicide, try to get away with it because of his infatuation with his former professor. I wouldn't buy into that theory in a million years, everyone. Again, it makes no sense. Okay? No matter how deranged you are, in my opinion, everyone. So, and by the way, everyone, Daniel, of course, he's interviewed Howard Bloom several times, I believe, right? Howard Bloom is this guy who wrote a book even before the trial. He wrote a book on the Idaho4, and it has some interesting information. He'll put out some truths, but I believe he mixes in a lot of lies and misinformation in that book as well, my friends, in my opinion. Because now Howard Bloom, he's trying to follow corporate media. See, they're trying to dig up. They're trying to make believe an outrageous, far-fetched motive for Brian Kohberger. There is no motive, my friends. There's absolutely no motive. And yet Howard Bloom, when he was interviewed with Daniel from the Drunk Turkey Show, or Daniel has since said that in Howard Bloom's book, he made accusations, apparently that about Catherine Ramsfield, that she might be helping Brian Kohberger with his sister or something. And she made, Howard Bloom has made all these different accusations, my friends, okay? And he's trying to come up with a motive of Brian Kohberger when there is no motive, my friends. Can I be any more clear? As I just said earlier, everyone, please never forget this of the Idaho4 case. We should be trying to free Brian Kohberger, in my opinion. He couldn't have done the crime, and he didn't do the crime. Okay? And again, it goes back, everybody. There is no identifiable connection for Brian Kohberger, and this has been proven. He has no identifiable connection to the victims, the family, the residents, and really not even the community. Again, he comes from Northern State or whatever it's called, right, everyone? His parents live in Pennsylvania. He went to, I always forget that university there. Washington State. Sorry, my friends, right? And we know there was a huge, huge drug bust shortly after the atrocity in Washington State, right? We know there were drug busts, I believe, before the Idaho4. So again, everyone, this was, I believe, a gang-sanctioned hit. I've discussed this in previous videos, so I'm not going to rehash that. But just know, everyone, Brian Kohberger, he didn't do this crime. He couldn't have done it. But guess what, everyone? First of all, my condolences again goes out to the parents of these victims, and, God rest their souls. And that means Kaylee Gonzalez, 21 years old, right? Madison Mogan, 21 years old. Again, they were like this. They were sisters. They grew up together. They had unconditional love for one another. And then you had Zaina Canudo, 20 years old. Ethan Chapman, 20 years old. All four beautiful, vivacious, intelligent students had their lives unalived, taken out way too early, my friends, right? It's deplorable and it's evil what happened, my friends. But Brian Kohberger, he has certain flaws in his personality, as we all do, everyone. He's had his struggles with hardcore drugs. But there is no evidence that this guy was homicidal. There's no evidence that he went into the home. We could talk for hours on this, my friends. And there is no motive, okay? There isn't. No matter how much corporate media now are trying to try to spin it, right? And again, it makes no sense. And Howard Bloom, everybody, right? They try to dig into the psychology of Brian Kohberger, why he did these crimes. And it makes no sense. Right, everyone? But again, if it's a gang-sanctioned hit, they had motives, unfortunately, to take out these four victims, unfortunately, I believe, my friends. And it all has to do probably with Xana's stepmother, right? As I said in one of my videos, by the way, everyone, we know that all three female victims had parents that had direct ties to or went to prison with or dealt hardcore drugs. And that is the biggest, highest risk we know for victims. But again, don't you think these guilters should be talking about that, everyone, and focusing on that fact and this angle? No, they totally ignore it, by and large, my friends. Daniel from the Drunk Turkey Show, I don't think has ever focused on the drug angle. He's all zeroed in on Brian Kohberger, and he just largely follows a lot of the FBI and law enforcement's narrative. Daniel, wake up, dude. You can't trust the FBI. We can't trust a lot of law enforcement, unfortunately, in this case, even though most cops normally do a great job. But anyway, these are my opinions, everybody. But really, when you look at it, I think the facts back it up. And again, feel free to check out Daniel Drunk Turkey Show, my friends. But I hope you might even leave him some comments. But do it nicely and just tell him, dude, there's no motive for Brian Kohberger to do this atrocity. This was an absolutely heinous, brutal, bloody crime scene, apparently. And we're going to get more details in the trial, everyone. Okay? And by the way, you had two surviving roommates, right? So we're supposed to believe that even though Brian Kohberger had no motive to do a quadruple unaliving, he left two roommates alive. Why? Everybody has been trying to figure this out, right, everyone? Well, the reason is because Brian Kohberger didn't do the crimes, I believe, my friends. But guess who did? As I said, it was probably a gang-sanctioned hit. Almost certainly, my friends. Okay? And it probably was done by elements of the Aryan family, the Aryan Knights. And Jay Embry's done whole videos, video after video after video, connecting those dots, my friends. So I'm not going to rehash this, but just know that. Okay, everyone? And again, I repeat, Brian Kohberger had no, you know what I'm about to say, no motive to do this atrocities, my friends. Okay? So, what else did I want to just include as before we wrap up here, everyone? I just wanted to read something here. Oh, speaking of motive, everyone, remember, as part of the convenient narrative and all this misinformation and lies from elements of the law enforcement, and we know the university establishment, anybody who does critical thinking in this case should understand that, unfortunately, I believe elements of the university establishment combined with law enforcement and elements of the FBI, it's a huge cover-up, my friends. Yes, they're all working together. They don't want you to know that Brian Kohberger didn't do this crime. They don't want you to focus on the real truth that the evidence points towards likely it was a gang-sanctioned hit. Okay? Follow the money. We know the university, as I've said in previous videos, and many YouTubers have said it, we know the university would lose almost all the revenue, wouldn't they, everyone? Because 95% of parents, even if they suspected that this could be a gang hit or there was more than one assailant, in other words, do you think the parents would send their children, their young adolescent children, do you think they would allow them to go back to the University of Moscow, Idaho? Of course not. Right, everyone? But we got to get the truth out, my friends, I believe, right? Because we got an innocent man in jail. Now, I have put out the theories that maybe Brian Kohberger himself is an informant. Maybe he's working with law enforcement in some capacity. That's possible. We're going to do whole videos on this. Yes, I know, everyone, the rabbit hole goes deep in this case. I don't think you're going to find a crazier, wilder case than the Idaho4. Some people compare it to, what's the other one with Richard Allen, the Delphi case. But I don't think there's hardly any comparison. I think the Idaho4 takes it to a whole other level in terms of the cover-up, the people involved that are, trying to hide the truth. It's crazy, my friend. And it's so tragic. 4 young university students, the way they were, the Delphi case is tragic in its own. But so anyway, guys and gals, I almost forgot. So I wanted to talk about, remember, mainstream, lamestream media. What were they putting out over a year ago for the longest time? Remember, they kept saying that they would imply that Brian Kohberger, because again, they have to try to show a motive, right? Because there's got to be a motive for somebody or more than one assailant to do these crimes, right? So they would put a motive out that they claimed that, BK, Brian Kohberger, he unalived the 4 victims because he was jealous of Madison Mogen and Kaylee Gonzalez's love for one another. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? But that's what mainstream media put out. It's so ridiculous. As if. Come on. And then you get, again, other guilters like Daniel from the Drunk Turkey Show, even though he's a great guy. They imply that maybe Brian Kohberger did it to get fame. No. Brian Kohberger didn't do this case. And my friends, I don't know of anybody that does a quadruple homicide just to get fame. And by the way, everyone, Brian Kohberger, he's an intelligent guy, right? This makes this case so fascinating. And one of the reasons why, because he was taking his PhD in criminology. So guilters like even Daniel from the Drunk Turkey Show, I believe, and others, they try to think, they imply almost at times like it's, this is a one-off Ted Bundy. You've heard many guilters say that, right, everyone, in mainstream media. But again, it's horseshit in my opinion. Excuse my language, everyone. Absolute horsepucky, man. Now, Brian Kohberger, the only thing that Brian Kohberger had in common with Ted Bundy, right, is they both did criminology. They both took criminology and PhD. So that's about it. Again, everyone, when, for example, as I said in my other videos, I believe, remember when Ted Bundy unalived, several, unfortunately, students in that dorm room, the guy was already insane at that point. He had escaped from jail, right? And he had other motives for doing it. It was just, Brian Kohberger has none of this, my friends. He has no motive. Okay? I don't think I could be any more clear. So that's what I wanted to convey in this video, everyone. Pardon?
I think he said it.
My sister just shouted out that she thinks that Brian Kohberger did this atrocity. But she's smiling. I don't think she means what she says. She's paying attention to this case too.
Why defense are following him in Pennsylvania? That's a big.
Oh, yes. So the next video that we'll do, perhaps everyone, my sister just said she wants to know why was Brian Kohberger being surveilled apparently before and after this, or before the atrocity even, okay? We'll talk about that in future videos. Thanks for that input, sister. Thank you, everyone, my audience, for listening. Thank you for those of you, especially new to my channel. And thank you to all my subscribers. I guess we're at almost 60 subscribers already. And I've only released a couple videos. Thank you so much, everyone. But I want to grow this channel. Let's bring truth and transparency and awareness, of course, to the Idaho4. Let's get justice for the victims in this case, of course. Again, Kaylee Gonzalez, 21 years old. Madison Mogen, 21 years old. Both beautiful, intelligent, vivacious students. Ethan Chapman, 20 years old. And you had Xana Cornudo, 20 years old. May their souls rest in peace. And again, my friends, one more time, Brian Kohberger has no identifiable connections to the victims, the family, the residents, and nor even really the community. This guy was from out of state. But isn't that a convenient narrative for law enforcement, FBI, trying to cover up, I believe, the real assailants? But guess what, my friends? One final thing. Ann Taylor and the defense team, we know now that in the trial, they're going to come out with different perps or, more than one assailant. And they got to show evidence for that. And I think they'll be able to do it. So, and we got to bring truth and awareness too, my friends. This was a gang sanctioned hit, I believe, unfortunately. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you subscribe again. Hit that like button and smash it, would you please? If you enjoy my videos, hit the bell icon. We're going to do future videos. You'll be notified, and leave me a comment. Again, I read them and I appreciate that engagement. Even if you disagree, I'll read your criticisms, everyone. Okay? But I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. My name is ESTEY'S Crime Maze. Thanks, everyone. See ya. Till next time on the Idaho4.